Okay, so we're streaming live now, and I'm just going to give people a few minutes to join us. But my name is Shanna. I am the host of the Israel Daily News podcast, and I'm so excited because we have member of Knesset Michal Cotler Wunsh with us here, and we have spoken with her in the past, and it was such a pleasant experience, and we're going to have another pleasant experience now. And I remember thinking on the last live, well, it was only live for us because we pre-recorded it, and I said this was such a shame that we couldn't get everybody to join us and see it happen live. So we are just going to give people a few moments to join us. And I'm going to be, oh, I see that we're live on the Israel Daily News page. So we are going to then share it so that more people can see it. So if everyone will just give us a moment, we are going to share this. Whoever would like to share can just hit the share button and put it on their page, because we're going to talk about some things that are going to be important for Olim and people who want to get a proper send off from Michal before her next journey, because it's not a send off for the end, it's a send off for the next beginning. So in the meantime, you can see us live on Michal's Facebook page, on my Facebook page. Yeah. And we're just going to give people a few more minutes to join us. Again, my name is Shanna Fold. I'm the host of the Israel Daily News podcast. And we do a daily show where we get people the news in English. And we try to make it real simple and easy. We don't want you to have to think too much. We want you to get the headlines. And we always end the show with something energetic so that people can feel really good about themselves and about what's going on in the state of Israel. So I'm going to totally begin for us. Hello and welcome to the Israel Daily News podcast. My name is Shanna, and today we are doing a live interview with MK Michal Cotler Wunsh. And I just want to explain what we're doing. We have a few things that are going on. One is that this is the Women in Israel mini series, and we're very honored to have Michal Cotler Wunsh with us to talk about being a woman in Israel before talking about what it means to be a member of Knesset, because she's a woman in Israel. And my series has been highlighting women who have come to Israel and not thrown in the towel on their political or I don't even want to say political, but career aspirations. She has continued her journey that she started abroad and brought it with her, went back, came back, and continues to work very hard every day. And we're going to get later on to what it means to work hard. So this is a series that we're doing live on Facebook called Women in Israel for the Israel Daily News podcast. And the show is an energetic roundup of the top 5 news stories coming out of Israel. It ends, each show ends with a song from an up and coming Israeli artist, because we love to promote the arts at our show. And on Thursdays we do something special like what we're doing today, which is a live series where we do interviews and sometimes we do special investigations. In fact, one of our investigations, we found out after the fact that MK Michal Cotler Wunsh had actually had a heavy hand in, which was getting the loan banot sharut, the services that they needed. That was a very proud moment for the Israel Daily News podcast, as we investigated what the issues were in the loan banot sharut community, which are lone women who do service in Israel. And we helped them with our report get the services that they were expecting to get but didn't get. And we found out after the fact that Michal had been behind the scenes on that. So she's done a lot of great work, and I'm going to introduce her now. Michal is with us. She comes from the Blue and White Party. She's about to exit this party and exit politics for now, as Israel enters a 4th election in March, at the end of March. And we're going to, like I said, start out talking about her being a woman in Israel and then move into her political career and what's up next. Michal, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Shannon. Thank you for everybody who's here tonight. It sounds like you have an amazing series going on, so I'm delighted to be here and engage with you in this discussion.
Thank you. Yes, it's very important for us to highlight the women in Israel And the way that it got started was I was looking for somebody to give me a special report for Thursday. I hadn't come up with a Thursday report. And I typed into a women's group called Belaviv, and I asked if there were any women in business who had an interesting story that I could do a highlight on. And I got such an overwhelming response from all of the immigrant women in Israel who were doing incredible work. And I couldn't choose one. So I just picked one to start. And here we are about 7 episodes later, and we have you with us, and you really fit the bill.
Well, thank you. If I had to start my women's story, I would actually start with my own mom. My mom raised me as a single parent in Jerusalem in the 1970s. That wasn't a simple task. And actually, we talk about me entering Knesset now, in this last Knesset, in this outgoing Knesset, but actually my first experience in Knesset was as a little girl, as a 7-year-old girl, that my mother, was at the time the parliamentary secretary for the Likud party, Menachem Begin's parliamentary secretary. And, the hallways of the Knesset were where I played hide and seek with real historic giants. And the night of 1977, what's known as the Mahapach, that Menachem Begin actually won the election, and another tremendous woman that I had the real zchut, the real privilege to know and meet is Eliza Begin. And Eliza Begin, and not many people know about her significant role in her husband's leadership, was really a woman ahead of her time in terms of understanding that in order to create social mobility, you're going to like this, meet with women. You had to meet with the mothers. And in order to move women out of very difficult neighborhoods and families out of very difficult neighborhoods, in order to enable their children to have social mobility, she founded the first sort of social housing project, Shikun Shchunot. And I would go with my mother late at night with Eliza Begin to these, sort of parlor meetings in different homes in order to convince mothers to move out of the difficult neighborhoods that their children were growing up in. So I think that it's, I'm very glad to be here engaging on this topic. And I feel that it's really an opportune moment to talk about the significant women that really shaped my understanding as a woman. And of course, then, growing up in Canada, which I did, to a human rights activist, and understanding that women around the world have such an important role. And I'll share one more story about a significant woman, because my own parents' meeting when I was 7 years old was around Anatoly Sharansky's freedom, right? The plight of Soviet Jewry and the imperative to release them. And my father, Professor Erwin Kotler, in fact, did represent Natan Sharansky, Anatoly Sharansky at the time, and many Soviet Jews. But what many people don't know is how powerful Avital Sharansky, who actually was parted from Natan just a day after their wedding and did not see him for over 10 years. I believe it was 13 or 14 years that they did not meet again after their wedding, if you can imagine that. And she met with world leaders in order to ensure Natan's freedom. So when we think of those tremendous women, and actually as soon as Natan, sort of was released from prison and moved to Israel, she went back into the, sort of behind the scenes. She's a tremendous woman as well. And so knowing women of that kind and being here tonight and speaking about my own experience, I actually want to speak about the challenges of having come as a lone soldier to Israel after growing up in Montreal as a woman. And at the time, that was not a simple task. Being in Israel alone. And that's part of the reason that my commitment to lone soldiers generally, and you mentioned Bnot Shirut as well, because I think that women very often, more women than men, actually serve in national service. Coming alone to do so should not be receiving any different treatment than lone soldiers. Really? But most importantly, coming as women, and maybe some of the women we have here tonight, having moved 10 years ago, from Canada with my 4 children, of course, my husband as well, but understanding that moment of, it was the first time that I felt in a long time that I was never, ever going to be able to leave my house again. Never going to leave my kitchen, because my children were coming home between 12 and 2 every day from school. And this is a challenge that many, many women that emigrate to Israel from, what we were accustomed to, a long school day, face. Of course, on top of the challenges of language and professional recognition and the acknowledgement that we have a voice that we have to sound, even if it's with an accent, even if our Hebrew is imperfect. That is probably the most important piece of real recognition and empowerment of how important these women's voices are around decision-making tables wherever you go. It doesn't have to be politics. Wherever it is you go, to lean in, to utilize, the phrase of another woman, and suggest that we have not only the ability, but the responsibility to lean in and take our rightful place around the table.
I absolutely love that. And I don't know what's going on with my eye, but as you were telling that story about the Sharanskys, I was just getting really teared up. Because I think that it's so important. I think right now, in an age of digital media and social media, we are learning about how to um, politely, I don't even want to say politely, but correctly self promote. And so I think that one thing that is good about that is that people are now starting to be able to have the ability to share what so many wonderful women are doing. And so many of the women that you talked about, you said it's not known, but it's not known, but and so my hope and my goal with the Women in Israel series is that people can just appreciate, maybe there's someone who doesn't have a following of 10,000, but she's changing lives every day. And so that my goal is just to shine a light on all of these women who wake up every single day and dedicate so much of themselves to making their communities a better place. And we all know that if you start with your community, that already changes the whole world because each person contributes to it. So thank you for telling us about that. It's very important. Studies have shown that what you learn from your parents, if your parents are business owners, you're much more likely to be a business owner. So we see that works. That worked for you. That your mother was in politics and community organizing, and so are you. So that's wonderful. I wanted to note that you speak many languages, and I just wanted to know if you could give us a very brief wrap of the languages that you speak, how that impacts your policy, and just tell us where you started, and then your moves back and forth between Montreal and Israel, so that everybody can know where you come from.
Okay, absolutely. So yes, I speak English, Hebrew, and French. I find that a tremendous gift. I think language beyond just the language are also the cultural and the nuanced understanding, and also, and I speak about this often, the multiplicity of identities that coexist in harmony, usually in harmony, even if in disharmony, that's okay too, because we have to learn to engage with that. But that is a very important part of what I've brought with me wherever I go, including to Knesset, and that is the viewpoint diversity. So it's not just about the language, it's about the understanding that when we speak a language, we bring so much more alongside that. And actually have the importance of making that accessible. So knowing that people don't speak a language, how left out of the conversation that they are. So I say that, new immigrants to this country, women, of course, should take their rightful place around the table, but we have to empower them to take their rightful place around the table. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that after, when I talk about what I've done about that in Knesset. Just to answer you briefly, as I said, I was born in Jerusalem and, spent my formative years here in Jerusalem, and then moved to Montreal at the age of 8, and grew up in Montreal and attended high school, returned to Israel and served as a lone soldier here. And actually my LLB, my first degree in law, is from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I worked as a lawyer in the Ministry of Justice and so on, and then actually returned to Canada to pursue a master's in law at McGill University, and ended up there for 10 years. So moved there with one little child and came back with 4 very Canadian children who skied more or less when they learned how to walk. And I think that those transitions back and forth, I'm very grateful for them. I don't for a second hide that there is no difficulty in those kinds of moves for everybody. But I think that they equip me with a tremendous understanding, first of all, of immigration and what that looks like and how challenging that is. I think it has informed my understanding in everything that I've done. When I think of the intersections of the issues that I'm very, very preoccupied with and committed to, it is the internal Israeli resiliency, it is Israel diaspora relations, and it is Israel standing in the international arena, and those moves back and forth actually equipped my understanding in multiple ways, in ways that I couldn't have had, actually, that I wouldn't have been challenged to have if I hadn't had the privilege of living both in Israel and in Canada and speaking those three languages, and being really exposed to the multiple identities, as I said, that come with that, including community involvement, which you mentioned. That's very, very important.
So that's great, and I think that it really adds a lot of credibility and maybe even a sigh of relief for people who are looking up to you and realizing that you are working through the legislative branches to get them certain rights and to get them clarity. So I think people can trust you, that you relate to them. Now, I want to move into, before we move on, for anyone who's just joining us now, I want to explain what's going on. My name is Shanna Fold. I'm the host of the Israel Daily News podcast. We are here with MK, member of Knesset, Michal Cotler Wunsh, and we are talking about being a woman in Israel. And more than that, we're going to be talking about her political career. I want to let anyone know who's watching that if you do have a question that pertains to what we're discussing, you can write it in the comments, and I'll try to save a couple minutes at the end to ask this question for you. So, member of Knesset, can you tell us what has been the most important project that you've worked on so far during your time in politics?
So first of all, that's a hard question. I have to be honest. I think the most rewarding by far, the most gratifying by far, has been to sound the voices of Olim, to be able to extend the criteria. For example, when COVID-19 just, we first understood what the ramifications were. So to extend the criteria to enable visitations to lone soldiers, to Bnot Shirut, to Olim that had given birth in Israel and hadn't seen family. Now it's coming up to a year, and didn't know in how long, how much longer they would not see family. And we understand that the challenges of COVID-19, beyond the economic challenges and the societal general challenges, there's also a real mental health challenge, right? Being here alone in Israel, all of us who know that we left family behind to emigrate to Israel, it's a component that we don't always give enough attention to. And I say we really must, and we really should. And you spoke about, the rights of Olim and so forth, but in many ways, I think about this as giving equal access to Olim, an equal ability for social mobility, if you will, so that they just have the same conditions as everybody else, which at the moment, people who have to go travel to Petah Tikva to visit their mother actually are on much better footing than somebody who might have to travel to Montreal or Vancouver or New York to visit their parent. So by far, that has been the most rewarding. And I have to say that the outpouring of gratitude and of thanks of thousands of people that have felt represented, and that is how I have served in Knesset, as I have served a constituency of voices that don't necessarily or haven't necessarily been able to feel that they have somebody sounding the issues that challenge them. So those, for example, are tremendous. The importance of understanding the challenges of Ulpan, the challenges of not having an infrastructure that recognizes academic degrees, the imperative of identifying and removing hurdles for Aliyah. And with COVID-19, there have been some amazing things as well. So we're talking about 250,000 of potential Olim that are looking to come to Israel over the next 3 years. Well, they will only come if we enable their coming to be as successful. And if we ensure not only their Aliyah and their Klita, but actually their, what I call hishtalvut, their integration into Israeli society. And for that has been the most rewarding. I will say that there have been a few very important paradigms which I've began to challenge. I have sat on about 10 committees and subcommittees, including the Security Committee and Foreign Relations. And there, in terms of Israel standing in the international arena, I have made some serious headways with regards to the recent ICC, International Criminal Court decision, and also the imperative of identifying and combating anti-Semitism as part of the disinformation challenge, which the whole world faces. But the imperative for the State of Israel too, and for Israel's Knesset too, to take part in the challenges of combating anti-Semitism, both on and offline.
I'm glad that you mentioned the ICC determination that came out, because you have a strong background in international politics. and international court systems and how they work. And I know that this is something we spoke about last time. Just briefly, this wasn't on my agenda for today, but I wanted to know, what's your response to hearing that the ICC has come out and said, regardless that Israel is not a member of our court system, we feel that we must intervene. How do you respond to that?
So I'll say once again, in terms of the important understanding that the Knesset, that Israel's parliament must engage in this, and actually I was appointed to be the special envoy to the issue of the ICC as we were actually expecting this decision. It's very important, and as I engage with my fellow parliamentarians and in general with people around the world, it's very important that we recognize that this is not Israel's challenge strictly or only. Israel, and the decision actually that was published very, very uncomfortably for me on last Friday night. So as we were celebrating Shabbat, actually, and I didn't see the decision until Motzei Shabbat, until Shabbat was out. That decision does not just undermine the relationship of, Israel with the ICC, although, as you said, Israel is not a state party, but it actually undermines the very principles that ICC is founded on. So it's important that people understand that there are legal principles such as jurisdiction. And you mentioned Israel is not a state party to the Rome Statute or to the ICC. But what happened there was, not only is Israel not a state party, but Palestine is not a state. And the ICC actually created sort of using legalese, which aren't actually based on law, in order to justify why it does have jurisdiction, a foundational principle of the ICC, over a state that does not exist, or based on allegations made by a state that does not exist according to any international law principles, over a state that is not a state party. So it really is an Orwellian inversion of what jurisdiction was ever meant to mean. And it's important that we recognize that 7 countries and multiple international law experts actually submitted amici briefs to the ICC, which the majority opinion completely ignored. And it's important that we read the dissenting opinion of Justice Kovac, because the dissenting opinion actually said there are no legal principles or no legal justifications for the decision regarding jurisdiction. There's one more very, very fundamental principle of law, of international law, called complementarity, that also speaks to the fact that the ICC should not be investigating or even considering an inquiry with regards or vis-a-vis the allegations against the state of Israel, because complementarity states the following: that countries that have a legal system, and Israel does, that have the rule of law as their guiding principle, and Israel does, are not actually candidates for the ICC's inquiries or reports or any of its work, because the ICC was founded to be a court of last resort, to protect the human rights in cases of blatant human rights violations of those that do not have a court to turn to, or a justice system to address the human rights violations. So that is not only my initial response, it's my response all over. I think it's very important that we engage with other countries, with other parliaments. And I believe that it's the countries that submitted amici briefs. It's the countries that fund the ICC. And it's all trustees of international law and human rights that profoundly want to protect the rights, the human rights, in a world that we speak of terrible human rights violations, whether it's Uyghurs in China or Venezuela or women and journalists in Iran. And at the same time that this court of last resort uses its limited resources to consider an inquiry against the state of Israel, it at the same time decides not to address any of those human rights violations, real human rights violations, against people that do not have a court that they can turn to. So that has been, but this week has been about a very important understanding that we should all have and engage with our friends around the world for them to join in understanding the imperative for the ICC's reform if it is to fulfill its mission, vision, and values.
Absolutely. Very, very startling, especially when you bring up the limited resources that there are for the ICC to use, and choosing to ignore some of the cases in which people are not represented at all and have no body of representation to take their cases. Very concerning. Now, you are you have not been placed on a party list for the upcoming Israeli election at the end of March. Very simply, why did that happen?
So look, um, I don't, I can't answer for any of the party lists and why I'm not there, but I will tell you what I intend on continuing to do, whether, in Knesset or utilizing another platform. The issues, and some of them we've touched upon, this evening, the issues and the voices that I represent are far more important and far greater than any one particular party in this upcoming election. What is important for all of our listeners to actually be aware of is that they deserve a voice around the table. And I turn to all my fellow Olim and say, ask hard questions. Ask hard questions of all the parties that are currently publishing or not publishing party platforms, which is a whole conversation in and of itself, because I believe that that's part of the accountability to the voting public, and should be a basic expectation.
That's democracy. That's what democracy is, making these things apparent.
Right, and that's transparency, and that's taking responsibility and being held to account after the fact as well. And so I encourage everybody that's engaged in any way politically and looking for a political home in this upcoming election to ask difficult questions, to engage and ask difficult questions. There should be representation around the decision-making tables of these voices. And I'll say something. I think that the voices of Olim, and I think about this often, Olim is a state of mind. It doesn't matter when you came and where you came from. And actually, there are many Israeli-born, such as myself, Israeli-born individuals that lived outside of Israel for a time. And I think the state of mind or the perspective that is very important for the state of Israel at this historic intersection is actually the ability to see from the outside in, and not only from the inside out. I think it is imperative that we understand that we live in this global reality with its global challenges, certainly in the issues that I represent in terms of international law. We didn't talk about the golden case and cause, but we talked about the ICC and about anti-Semitism, the imperative to combat it, and also Israel diaspora relations. I think that Olim are more than the bridge. They are actually what breathes life, what enables the interpreters, if you will, of both internal Israeli society and the rifts that we feel, and we have the capacity to enable that healing. Of course, the rifts and the gaps with diaspora communities around the world, and certainly with regards to Israel's standing in the international arena. So as the interpreters, and I don't just mean English or French or Spanish, as the interpreters of what we discussed at the beginning of a conversation, as people who understand viewpoint diversity and multiplicity of identities, we have a very important voice to sound. And I intend to continue sounding it, whether from the Knesset in the future, and whether in the immediate future, finding additional platforms in which to sound the voices and champion the issues that we are all committed to.
First of all, thank you for that, because I know that the immigrant community is in a way mourning your official departure, because you have been such a representative and you have used English and you have used social media and you have broken things down. I mean, even just this week when we found out that the Israel airport was going to be closed, and what would that mean for English speaking people? And forget about whether or not the information is there to be accessed. Just the feeling, just the emotion of being overwhelmed, just the emotion of feeling like it's in a different language, or it's not meant for you, or you're just going to sit idle and wait until something breaks. You have dismantled so much of that by making this information accessible. And as we say on the Israel Daily News podcast, knowledge is the best weapon. So you've really made that knowledge, you've really armed the immigrant community with knowledge as their weapon. So my question is, when we talk about you not being here in this capacity, do you believe that this was an attempt to silence English speakers? Do you think that by not having you on any party list, especially after you defended and pushed so much for some of the other politicians to rise to the top, and you were doing this background work to get leaders to the forefront, and then to be almost and it's not my place to say this, but almost slapped in the face by having your work not really considered in the most important way, which is to continue to have you in your spot? Do you think that this is an attempt at having Israelis say, be quiet, Americans, be quiet, Canadians, we're tired of hearing you whining. We don't want to consider you. We don't want to make things in English. We want you to adapt. Like, is this a silencing mechanism?
So first of all, we're not going to be silenced. That's the first thing I can tell you. And everybody that's here tonight and listening to us in general, we're not going to be silenced. And I think it's a testament to a lack of understanding of how important and significant these voices are, how important and significant they are, not just for our own representation. As I said, not just in order to ensure that we, have a fair shake and enable access to bureaucracy, but also to mental health in English, and create equivalency of degree recognition, and ensure that Ulpan is accessible for longer than the time that it may be accessible now, and updated in the ways that it needs to be, and so on and so on. Really, the list goes on. Not just that. The imperative processes that the state of Israel, and we are a work in progress, and I want to remind us something. We are the founding generation of this country. It is 72 years old. It is not even 100 years old. And the founding mothers and fathers, they laid down the physical infrastructure for this country. It is our role to lay the next level, let's call it the spiritual infrastructure of what it means to be a Jewish and democratic country. One of the first bills that I submitted is the Declaration of Independence, the Basic Law Declaration of Independence, to cement and actually renew the covenant around the shared values of Israel as Jewish and democratic, not democratic state of all its people, not Jewish a halacha state. And now we can begin the conversation. Now, our voices, the voices I have been privileged to represent, they're not going to be silenced. We're going to take a leadership role in leading these imperative processes. So this is just, I'm not going to say the beginning because it's a continuation, but it's certainly not an end. It is a continuation. And I encourage everybody that's listening here and beyond our reach, we will continue to engage. We will find the way to continue engaging and actually maximizing and amplifying our voices so that come the next election, we are well represented. In whatever capacity and whatever form, we are going to be well represented. And so we're going to be back. And I think it's very important that we identify and acknowledge the importance of our voices for the sake of the entire Israeli public and the Jewish people. We truly have an important voice to sound. Now, the fact that others might not acknowledge it, that's not going to slow us down, not even a little bit. And so everybody that's here and your support and engaging with you in this way, Shana, to me, this is the most important. And as we continue creating these opportunities for engagement, we will just garner and gather more and more strength and be empowered by the voices that, we add to the conversation.
Sure.
And it is really, really important for everybody to recognize I would say, acknowledge and recognize the importance of our voices being around the table in the decision-making, decision-making intersections of Israeli society.
Thank you for that. I just want to remind everyone who's with us, if anybody has a question that they would like to ask, we're getting toward the end of our interview. So if there is a question that was on your mind or something that came up during this talk that you wanted to get a chance to ask Michal, please put it in the chat. We already got some great feedback saying, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your work, Michal. So here's a question that's not quite political, and it's maybe what you think in your personal life. So your assistant, Becca, who is absolutely excellent and helped us facilitate this interview and everything else, said that you are one of the hardest working people, if not the hardest working person that she's ever met. And I want to know, what does it mean to be a hardworking person? Does that mean, is being a hard-working person the number of hours that you've spent working on something? Is it the abundance of passion that you have? Is it the number of bills that you try to pass? Is it quantity? Is it quality? What does it mean to be hardworking? And what's something that you can advise young people who are making their way? What's something that they can take on to assure themselves that they too are working hard?
First of all, thank you. And I wouldn't be able to be this hardworking if it wasn't my team. Of course, Becca in the lead that have enabled. And I told my team as soon as we entered Knesset, I think on the first day, that we were going to treat every day like it's our first and our last, because, you know, it wasn't a secret that we're at this precarious time. And I often think and reflect back and think, like, would I have not been as hardworking if I didn't have this instability sort of breathing down my neck? But the truth is that at the end of the day, it wasn't just that the issues are so important and so pressing. And you asked very aptly, is it quantity or quality? You know, it's very important. If I would have to say one thing, you know, for you know, young people that are listening, it's to set a goal really, really, really high, because things will happen that may actually hold us back from being able to reach that goal. But set that goal really high and expect yourself to get to that goal. And then, of course, the second piece is to prioritize. And I'll say that Knesset has been a challenge in prioritizing. As I said, I sat on 10 committees and subcommittees, some very important committees, including chairing, you know, the Committee for Alcohol and Drug Use, Israel Diaspora Relations, as I said, the Foreign Relations and Security Committee, the Law Committee, the Women's Status, Children's Rights, and Aliyah and Klita Committee, that each one of them was no less important than the other. And maybe that's another piece of advice. It is all in our minds. If you decide that something is important, that is how you treat it. And at the end of the day, I think that there are elements of knowing how to work with other people that are very important and empowering, knowing how to partner and engage, knowing how to share and collaborate. And I've been very lucky to create a team in a very short time, really, a hardworking team that is dedicated and that is inspiring to watch in terms of their commitment as well. And lastly, I spoke about it a little bit at the beginning. The most important part of my days were my days hearing back from Olim that I had affected their lives personally. So where I take that is to draw strength and encouragement, and to take a moment to actually, it's not about patting yourself on the back, it's actually empowering yourself so that you can continue. It's actually taking a moment to recognize what you've been able to accomplish so that you can be empowered to continuing and do even more. Those would be the most important sort of lessons learned from the last 7 months. In general, again, set the goal really high, prioritize, collaborate, and create good teamwork. And at the end of the day, take the time to recognize your accomplishments so that you draw energy in order to continue.
I love that. And I wrote it all down. And for those of you who are on the Israel Weekly News Wrap, we send out a newsletter on Monday mornings with the news that you may have missed from throughout the week, the top 5 stories. And then we also do the Cliff Notes version of our investigations and special reports. So for those of you who want to have Michal's special regimen for success, I'm going to write that down in 4 bullet points for you there. You can sign up on the israeldaily.news website. Last question for you, Michal. First of all, thanks for empowering us with that, because I do think that a lot of us who are, you know, like me, I wake up and I'm crazy and I have things that I want to do, and I don't always stop and take a minute to be empowered by the strides that we've made. And even the, you know, because once you get to your bar, you're already on to the next one. And it can be so easy not to give yourself a pat on the back. And so I think that that's very, very good advice. Last question for you. I know you said that you're not going to stop and that you will continue to represent the Olim community, but what does that look like? Are you thinking about creating a new advocacy group? Are you thinking about having your own private law firm? What can we expect this to look like from you now that you're going to be out of the traditional political seat?
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to continue engaging with Olim because I have learned so much, and that's important to say. Even, you know, being able to extend the criteria to Olim that had given birth, that came from an email I received from an Ola, from Judith, who gave birth and knew that, or was due to give birth and knew that she wouldn't have her mother here with her. I have learned so much in the process. Now, the issues that brought me into Knesset, and I mentioned them, internal Israeli resiliency, Israel diaspora relations, and Israel's standing in the international arena from a legal perspective and beyond. Those are the issues that I intend to continue, both professionally, academically, and in every other way engaging. But the perspective that they bring with them, the intersection between them, is the Olim as translators, is the involvement with Olim that has enriched my experience, that has informed and that has given me insights on all of those issues. And the intersection of all of the issues that I'm committed to has come through the Olim's voices. And so I am going to create the platform from which to continue to engage with Olim so that we can continue raising the issues to the fore, so that we can continue empowering these voices, and God willing, so that when the time comes and I do re-enter Knesset, it can be knowing that I represent this constituency as much as every other Israeli citizen, but that I sound these voices and I'm committed to these voices around the decision-making tables, and that I deserve the honor and the responsibility that comes with it to represent these voices properly.
How do you think that that is going to look like? Do you have in mind an app that you want to create where you can streamline the voices? Do you want to open up a messaging service? Do you have any ideas of what the format might be there?
You know what I would love? I would love if anybody listening to us, including you, Shanna, have suggestions on how would be the best form to engage. And the truth is that I am open. So we have the traditional ways of engagement and, newsletters and a website and, whatever else. And if you have any suggestions, I'd be open to them. If there's anybody listening and they'd like to write into you, what I can tell you is that I am committed to continue this engagement. I think that it's important, and as I said, imperative, not only to acknowledge and recognize the importance of these voices, but for them to affect change for all of Israel's citizenship, for our relationship with our sisters and brothers in diaspora, and ultimately for Israel standing in the international arena as well, in the issues that challenge us, of course, in combating anti-Semitism and every other issue and subject that I have delved into at my time in Knesset before and will continue to do so, in the future.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate you for that. And I do know at least one person who has an idea for you, so we'll be in touch later. Thank you very much for giving us everything that you could, from stories about your mom to stories about the way that you spoke to your team when you got started, all the way up to what's up next for you. So thank you very much for blessing us with that, and Shabbat Shalom. Have a great weekend. I hope that no more ICC court rulings come out during Shabbos, so that when you get back online Saturday night, you can do it in a relaxing and not heart-wrenching way.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. All right, everyone, there you have it. My name is Shanna Fold. This has been Michal Cotler Wunsh. We're here on the Israel Daily News podcast doing a Facebook Live for our Women in Israel series. You can find our show. It is an energetic roundup of the top 5 news stories coming out of Israel on a daily basis. Each show ends with a song from an up-and-coming artist. And Thursdays, we do great original content just like this. And we do it live on Facebook and on Instagram sometimes. So follow us on social media at israeldaily.news. And again, I'm Shanna Fold, SHANNAFULD. And just get in touch if you are interested in listening. You can find us on Spotify, Google, Apple, anywhere that you get podcasts. And we will be updating our podcast today with some of the audio from this very engaging interview. Thanks so much, and Shabbat Shalom.